Folks, listen up. I could have retired comfortably at age 35 if I'd been a little smarter about one thing. And no, it wasn't picking better stocks. It was avoiding the trap that snares so many bright young people today: debt. I look at you millennials with your student loans piling up to six figures and credit cards maxed out at 20% interest, and I think, there but for the grace of God go I. Back in my day, I came close to making some dumb borrowing mistakes early on, but I learned fast that once you get into debt, it's hell to get out. You can't get ahead paying 18% or more to the banks while your savings earn next to nothing. Highlight: debt is the silent killer of wealth. And here's the kicker. The average millennial carries over $30,000 in non-mortgage debt right now. That's not freedom. That's slavery. But stick with me, because I'm going to show you how avoiding it entirely can set you free sooner than you ever imagined. Young folks, gather around for a minute, because I'm going to tell you something that might surprise you coming from an old codger like me. I could have retired comfortably at age 35. Yes, 35. If I'd been just a little smarter about one single thing. And no, it wasn't picking hotter stocks or starting Berkshire Hathaway earlier with Warren. It was something far simpler and far more common: avoiding debt. Now, I didn't quite retire at 35. I kept working because I loved the game: law, investing, solving problems. But the truth is, by my mid-30s, I'd already built enough of a nest egg that I could have walked away from the office forever and lived very well on the compounding returns alone. How? Because I stayed out of the borrowing trap almost entirely. I never let consumer debt get its hooks in me, and the little borrowing I did was modest, sensible, and quickly paid off. Look at you millennials today, and I feel a pang of sympathy mixed with exasperation. You're bright, educated, ambitious, often more so than my generation, but many of you are drowning before you even get started. The average millennial carries over $30,000 in non-mortgage debt: student loans, credit cards, car notes, buy now, pay later schemes. Student debt alone averages around $37,000 per borrower, and credit card interest rates are hovering near 25%. That's not a head start. That's a ball and chain. I came close to making the same mistakes early on. When I was building my law practice in Los Angeles in the 1950s and early 1960s, money was tight at times. I was divorced young, raising kids, starting over in a new city. There were moments when it would have been easy to borrow to keep up appearances: a nicer car, a bigger house, a little leverage to invest more aggressively. But something in me recoiled. I'd seen what debt did to otherwise intelligent people. It turns free men and women into servants of the bank. Debt is the silent killer of wealth. It's not the dramatic blow-ups that get you. It's the slow bleed. You pay 18%, 22%, 25% interest to credit card companies, while your own savings earn next to nothing in a checking account. Every dollar going to interest is a dollar that can't compound for you. And compounding, as you'll hear me say over and over, is the closest thing to magic we have in this world. Think about it this way. Suppose you're paying $500 a month toward high-interest debt. Over 10 years, that's $60,000 out of your pocket, and because of interest, you've actually paid far more. Now imagine instead that $500 a month going into a simple stock index fund, earning a historical 7% after inflation. In 30 years, that steady habit turns into nearly $500,000. One path leads to servitude, the other to freedom. The difference is debt. I once knew a young man, sharp as a tack, good family, top school, who graduated with engineering and business degrees in the late 1980s. He took out loans for a master's, then financed a luxury car to look the part at job interviews, racked up credit cards furnishing an upscale apartment. He figured his starting salary would cover it all. It almost did, until the 1990-91 recession hit. His firm laid off juniors, and suddenly he was scrambling. The minimum payments ate half his take-home pay. He spent the next 15 years digging out, missing the greatest bull market in history. By the time he was debt-free, he was in his mid-40s, starting to invest seriously when most prudent people are already enjoying the fruits of 3 decades of compounding. Contrast that with another fellow I knew who took the opposite path. He lived like a pauper for his first 10 working years, shared apartments, cooked at home, drove a 10-year-old car paid in cash, invested every extra dollar, no debt except a small mortgage. By 35, he had enough that he could have quit and lived modestly forever. He didn't quit either. He loved his work, but the option was there: freedom. You see the pattern. Debt doesn't feel like slavery when you sign the papers. It feels like progress, like leverage, like investing in yourself. That's the psychological trap. The credit card companies and student loan providers spend billions convincing you that borrowing is normal, responsible, even patriotic, and society reinforces it. Keep up with your peers, show success on the outside, post the vacations and the new gadgets. But success on the outside bought with borrowed money is just a mirage. Real success is sleeping well at night, knowing no one can take your home or your peace of mind because you owe them. So here's the promise I'm making to you today. Stick with me through this talk, and I'll show you exactly how I avoided the debt trap, how others have done it even in tougher circumstances than mine, and most importantly, how you can do it starting right now. You don't need a high income to begin. You need discipline and a clear understanding of how money really works. Avoid debt. Like the plague it is, live below your means for a while. Let compounding do the heavy lifting, and you'll have options the indebted can only dream about. You could be financially independent far earlier than you think, maybe even by 35, like I could have been. It's not glamorous, it's not flashy, but it's liberating. And liberation, my friends, is the ultimate luxury. Let me pull back the curtain a little more on my own life, because I didn't come from money, and I certainly didn't have any silver spoon. I was born in Omaha in 1924, right in the middle of the country, during tougher times than most of you can imagine. As a boy, I worked in the Buffett family grocery store. Warren's grandfather owned it, and Warren himself sorted bottles there too. We weren't rich, we were just regular folks trying to get by. I saw early how money came from hard work and careful handling. After the war, I scraped together enough to go to college, then talked my way into Harvard Law School without even having a bachelor's degree first. Ambitious, sure, but it left me with responsibilities and not much cash. By the time I moved to Southern California in the late 1940s to start practicing law, I was essentially starting from zero. I got married young, had 3 children, and then, life being what it is, went through a painful divorce when I was still in my 30s. I lost a lot in that settlement, and for a while I was sending substantial alimony checks while trying to raise my kids and build a law practice from scratch. There was a period there when things felt precarious. My oldest boy, Teddy, was sick with leukemia. We didn't have the treatments then that exist today, and he passed away at 9. That kind of grief on top of financial pressure can make a man do desperate things. I remember driving a beat-up old car, living in a modest house, counting every dollar. Friends and colleagues were buying nicer homes in Pasadena or Beverly Hills, driving Cadillacs, joining country clubs. It would have been easy to think, I'm a Harvard lawyer, I deserve better. I'll just borrow a little to bridge the gap until the big cases come in. But I didn't. Something stopped me. Maybe it was watching my father navigate the Great Depression without ever going into debt. Maybe it was just common sense. Instead, I lived well below what I earned, even when earnings started to grow. I saved aggressively, invested what I could in good businesses or real estate with cash, and kept my expenses low. No fancy office, no borrowed money to impress clients. Clients came because of results, not appearances. I once knew a fellow lawyer in those early Los Angeles days, let's call him Jack, who took the opposite path. Jack was smarter than me in some ways, quicker on his feet in court. He came out of school, borrowed to buy a grand house in Hancock Park, financed a new Buick every couple of years, took out loans to furnish the place properly. He figured his income would keep climbing, and the debt would take care of itself. For a while, it looked like he was right. Big house, nice parties, everyone envied him. Then the recession of 1957-58 hit. Legal work slowed. A couple of big clients went bankrupt and couldn't pay their bills. Suddenly, Jack's fixed payments, mortgage, car notes, personal loans, ate up everything he brought in. He started borrowing more just to cover the interest on the old borrowing. By 1960, he was underwater. The bank foreclosed on the house, and he had to start over in a tiny apartment at age 42. The stress aged him 10 years overnight. I watched that unfold and thought, there but for good judgment go I. That experience and others like it cemented something in me. Debt is a cruel master. It promises freedom today and delivers bondage tomorrow. The psychological trap is powerful. Envy, impatience, the desire to look successful before you are. You see your peers with the trappings of wealth, and borrowing feels like the shortcut to join them. But those trappings are often just rented, paid for with future labor. You millennials face a version of this that's even more insidious. Student loans are sold as an investment in yourself, but too often they're just overpriced credentials with interest rates that compound against you. Credit cards arrive unsolicited in college mailboxes. Car dealers push 6 or 7 year loans so you can drive something flashy. Buy now, pay later. Apps make impulse feel painless. The whole system is engineered to keep you paying interest instead of earning it. I avoided most of that. By the early 1960s, my law practice was doing well enough, and my investments, mostly in partnership with friends or in real estate deals paid for in cash, were starting to compound nicely. I'd reached a point where, if I'd wanted to, I could have stepped away from active work around age 35 or shortly after and lived comfortably forever. I didn't, because I enjoyed building things too much, but the option was there. That's real freedom. Not being rich enough to buy anything, but having enough that you don't have to do anything you don't want to. The difference between the path I took and the one Jack took wasn't intelligence or luck. It was discipline about borrowing. One of us paid interest to banks for years. The other earned interest from investments. One slept poorly. The other slept fine. One had choices. The other had obligations. So if you're listening to this and feeling the weight of your own loans or credit card balances, know this. I've been close to the edge myself. I know how tempting debt feels when you're young and eager, but I also know, from a lifetime of watching outcomes, that avoiding it is the surest path to the life you actually want. You know, it's not a lack of brains that gets most people into financial trouble. I've seen plenty of high IQ folks, doctors, lawyers, engineers, even PhDs, and up broke or shackled by debt in middle age. The problem is almost always the same. They fall for a handful of simple, predictable traps that any clear-thinking person could avoid if they just paused long enough to examine them. The biggest trap of all is leverage, borrowing money to amplify your bets. I've said it before and I'll say it again. There are 3 ways smart people go broke: liquor, ladies, and leverage. The first 2 are obvious enough, but leverage is the sneaky one because it feels sophisticated. Wall Street loves it, real estate gurus preach it, and young people soaked in the gospel of good debt swallow it whole. Let me tell you about a man I knew in California during the go-go years of the 1960s. Call him Bill. Bill was sharp, energetic, and convinced that real estate in Los Angeles would only go up. Interest rates were low, banks were eager to lend, and he could buy apartment buildings with 10% or 20% down. On paper, it was brilliant. Rents covered the mortgages, appreciation did the rest, and his net worth exploded. By 1965, he owned a dozen properties worth several $1 million, far more than I had at the time, and I thought I was doing pretty well. Then came the credit tightening of 1966 and the deeper squeeze in 1969-70. Interest rates shot up, vacancies rose, and suddenly his cash flow went negative. He couldn't sell without taking huge losses, and the banks started calling the loans. One by one, the properties went back to the lenders. By 1972, Bill was wiped out, divorced, and working a salaried job he hated just to pay basic bills. All that paper wealth, gone. The stress took years off his life. I watched that happen and felt no satisfaction, only relief that I hadn't followed the same path. I bought real estate too, but almost always with cash or very modest mortgages that I could pay off quickly if rents dried up. Slower growth, sure, but I slept at night. Fast forward to your generation, and the traps are different in form but identical in substance. Student loans are the new good debt. Everyone tells you borrowing $100,000 or $200,000 for a degree is an investment. Sometimes it is, but far too often it's a trap. Graduates come out earning $60,000 a year with payments that eat 15-20% of their take-home pay for a decade or more. That's money that can't compound for them. Meanwhile, the banks and the government collect interest with ruthless efficiency. Credit cards are even worse. The average interest rate today is over 24%. Think about that. You're paying nearly a quarter of every dollar in interest just for the privilege of buying something last month. The psychological trap is brutal. It feels painless at the point of sale. Swipe, smile, walk out with the new phone or the vacation photos. The pain comes later, spread out in minimum payments that barely dent the principal. Then there's the social proof trap. You look around and everyone seems to be doing it, leasing luxury cars, financing furniture, taking out personal loans for weddings or renovations. Instagram and TikTok amplify it. Every peer appears to be living a richer life than you, so you borrow to keep up, telling yourself it's temporary. But temporary becomes permanent, and permanent becomes oppressive. Another fellow I knew illustrates this perfectly. Bright young investment banker in the 1980s, earning $300,000 by age 28, He bought a co-op on Park Avenue with a big mortgage, financed a Porsche, ran up American Express bills on restaurants and travel. He figured bonuses would keep growing forever. Then came Black Monday in 1987. His firm cut staff, bonuses vanished, and suddenly he couldn't cover the payments. The bank took the car, the co-op board started foreclosure proceedings, and his credit was ruined for years. He spent the next decade digging out, missing the greatest bull market of the century, all because he confused income with wealth and borrowed against a future that didn't arrive. The consequences of falling into these traps are severe and compounding, just like interest, but in reverse. Every dollar paid to interest is a dollar that doesn't grow at 7%, 10%, or more in productive assets over decades. Miss 10 or 15 prime earning years servicing debt, and you've sacrificed hundreds of thousands, often millions, in future wealth. You work longer, retire poorer, and live with constant low-level anxiety about money. I avoided most of these traps not because I was smarter than Bill or the banker, but because I was more suspicious of easy money and more patient about building wealth. Warren and I never used margin debt at Berkshire, even when it would have juiced returns. Why risk ruin for a little extra speed? The same logic applies to personal life. Why risk financial ruin for a nicer car or a bigger house today? Most people fail because they overestimate their ability to predict the future and underestimate the cost of being wrong. They borrow assuming income will rise forever, emergencies won't happen, and markets won't turn. But life is full of surprises, almost none of them pleasant when you're leveraged. So if you want to avoid the fate of the Bills and the bankers, start by recognizing these traps for what they are. Ancient human weaknesses dressed up in modern marketing. Envy, impatience, overconfidence, they've sunk clever people for centuries. The good news is that once you see them clearly, they lose their power over you. Now that we've seen how easy it is to fall into the debt traps, let's talk about the way out. The simple, almost boring principle that has guided me and a handful of others to real financial independence. It boils down to this: spend less than you earn, save the difference aggressively, invest it prudently, and never, ever borrow money to buy things that depreciate or to fund a lifestyle you haven't yet earned. That's it. No secret formula, no hot stock tips, no complicated options, strategies. Just elementary arithmetic combined with a little self-control. But elementary does not mean easy. Most people can't or won't do it consistently, which is exactly why it works so well for the few who do. When I was building my net worth in those early years, I set myself a goal that I still recommend to anyone starting out. Get to $100,000 in liquid net worth as fast as humanly possible. In today's dollars with inflation, that might translate to $300,000 or $400,000, depending on where you live. The exact number isn't sacred. The idea is to reach a critical mass where compounding can start doing most of the work for you. Once you have that amount invested at a reasonable return, say 7% real after inflation, it doubles roughly every 10 years. So $100,000 becomes $200,000 in 10 years, $400,000 in 20, $800,000 in 30, $1.6 million in 40, without you adding another dime. Of course, if you keep saving and adding along the way, it grows much faster. The key is to get to that first milestone without debt dragging you backward. I reached that point myself sometime in my mid to late 30s. My law practice was throwing off good money, and I was investing most of the surplus in common stocks and a few real estate deals. No leverage, no margin loans, no credit card balances. Because I had no interest payments bleeding me, almost every dollar I saved went straight to work compounding. By around age 38 or 39, my investments were growing faster than my law fees. That's when I realized I could step away from active law practice if I wanted to. I didn't, because I enjoyed the investing game more. But the option was there. That's the freedom I'm talking about. The contrarian truth here is that debt is almost never a useful tool for ordinary people trying to get wealthy. Society tells you the opposite. Borrow for a house, borrow for education, borrow for a car, use leverage to build wealth faster. Good debt versus bad debt. I've heard it all my life, and most of it is self-serving nonsense peddled by banks and lenders who profit from your interest payments. A modest mortgage on a sensible house that you can pay off quickly. Fine if you must, but even then, I'd rather own outright. Everything else, cars, furniture, vacations, gadgets, weddings, pay cash or do without. If you can't pay cash, you can't afford it. Full stop. Cars are a perfect example of the trap. The average new car loan today is around $40,000 over 6 or 7 years at 7–10% interest. You drive off the lot and the thing depreciates 20% in the first year. You're underwater immediately, paying interest on a wasting asset. I drove old, reliable used cars for decades, paid cash, no payments, no stress. Warren still drives a modest Cadillac he bought used. We didn't look flashy, but we got rich. The psychological trap is the desire for immediate gratification and the fear of missing out. You want the nice apartment, the trips, the clothes that signal success. Borrowing feels like a shortcut, but shortcuts in wealth building are usually detours that lead to dead ends. Here's the actionable principle. Adopt a lifestyle that is 1 or 2 notches below what you can currently afford. If you make $80,000 a year, live like you make $60,000. Bank the difference. When you get a raise to $100,000, keep living on $60,000 and invest the rest. Most people do the opposite. They expand their lifestyle to match or exceed their income, then wonder why they're broke at 50. Track every expense for a few months. You'll be shocked at the leakage. Subscriptions you don't use, eating out, impulse purchases, cut ruthlessly, cook at home, buy quality used instead of new. Wait 30 days before any non-essential purchase. Half the time the urge passes. If you already have debt, attack it with intensity. Pay off the highest interest first, or use the snowball method for psychological wins, whatever keeps you motivated. But stop adding new debt today. Cut up the cards if you have to. Live on cash or debit. I did this instinctively because I grew up seeing what the Depression did to people who were overextended. But you don't need a depression to learn the lesson. Just look around at the stressed out, overworked people in their 40s and 50s who are one emergency away from disaster because their cash flow is committed to debt service. Live below your means long enough, and something magical happens. Your means start rising to meet your lifestyle because your investments are throwing off more income than your job ever did. That's when the game gets fun. That's when you can ease up a little, give more, travel if you want, without ever going backward. It's not glamorous. Nobody posts pictures on social media of their index fund statements or their 10-year-old paid-for car, but glamour bought on credit is fool's gold. Real wealth is quiet, steady, and liberating, so that's the core principle. Simple to state, hard to live, but devastatingly effective if you stick to it. Do this for 10 or 15 disciplined years, and you'll have options the rest of the world can only envy. I've talked a good deal about principles and traps, but nothing drives a lesson home like real human stories. People I've known or watched closely over the years, with names changed where needed, but details as accurate as memory allows. These aren't hypotheticals pulled from thin air. They're the outcomes I've seen play out again and again. Some ended in quiet triumph, others in unnecessary tragedy. All of them turned on one central question: how did they handle debt? Let's start with a tragedy that still sticks with me. Back in the late 1980s and early 1990s, I knew a young fellow named David working in the emerging tech world out in California. Sharp as they come, Stanford computer science, early employee at a company that went public during the dot-com run-up. By age 28, he was pulling in $150,000 base plus stock options that looked like they'd be worth millions. Everyone around him was spending like the party would never end. David bought a $800,000 house in Palo Alto with almost no money down. Interest-only loan, adjustable rate, the works. Financed 2 luxury cars, one for him and one for his wife. Took out home equity lines to furnish the place and fund lavish vacations. He even borrowed on margin to buy more tech shares, convinced the market only went up. On paper, his net worth hit 7 figures before he turned 30. Then 2000 came. The bubble burst. His company's stock plunged 95%, options became worthless, and he lost his job in the layoffs. The adjustable mortgage reset higher, house prices dropped, and suddenly he owed more than the home was worth. Margin calls wiped out his brokerage account. The cars were repossessed. By 2002, he and his family were renting a small apartment in a less desirable area, bankrupt, credit ruined, starting over from essentially zero at age 35. The stress contributed to a divorce a few years later. I ran into him occasionally after that. He rebuilt modestly, but he spent the rest of his career chasing the wealth he'd briefly tasted and lost, all because he built on borrowed sand. Contrast that with a quieter success story from the same era. Another acquaintance, Sarah, was a school teacher married to a civil engineer. Combined income never topped $120,000 even in good years. They bought a modest three-bedroom house in a decent but unfashionable suburb with 20% down and a 30-year fixed mortgage they could cover on one salary. Drove paid-for used Hondas. Vacationed frugally, camping or driving trips. No credit card debt ever. Every raise or bonus went straight to extra mortgage payments or index funds. By the late 1990s, when everyone else was leveraging up, they just kept doing what they'd always done. When the dot-com crash hit, their house value dipped a bit, but they weren't underwater and didn't need to sell. Their index funds dropped 40% temporarily, but they had no margin debt and kept buying. By 2010, they owned the house free and clear and had over $1 million in investments. Sarah retired at 58, her husband at 60, and they've spent the last 15 years traveling the world on their own terms. Cash, no debt, no worries. Same economic environment as David, radically different outcome. Closer to home, there's Warren's story, which mirrors mine in many ways. Warren bought his house in Omaha in 1958 for $31,500, about $350,000 in today's money, and he still lives there. Never upgraded to a mansion, never financed luxury cars or boats. He drove modest cars, ate at the same diners, clipped coupons even as a billionaire. No debt except brief, prudent use in the very early partnership days. The result? Compounding worked uninterrupted for 7 decades. He turned a modest start into one of the largest fortunes ever assembled, all without ever risking ruin, through borrowing. Then there's a medical professional I knew, a surgeon named Michael. Brilliant hands, earned $400,000 a year by his mid-30s, but he loved the symbols of success, financed a 6,000 square foot home, a boat, a vacation property in the mountains, luxury SUVs for the family, kept it all going with loans and lines of credit. Then in his early 50s, he developed a heart condition that limited his operating time. Income dropped sharply, but the fixed payments didn't. He sold assets at depressed prices, drained retirement accounts to avoid foreclosure, and ended his career stressed and asset poor. A frugal colleague in the same practice, same income potential, but lived in a paid-for $300,000 house, drove used cars, invested the difference, retired at 60 with plenty, healthy, and relaxed. One more personal example from my investment partnership days in the 1960s. We had a deal involving British Columbia Power, a complicated arbitrage where we could borrow short-term at favorable rates for a near-certain profit. It worked out beautifully, made a nice return, but I remember the mild anxiety during the few months the loan was outstanding, worried about renewal rates or some unforeseen snag. It wasn't much money in hindsight, but the feeling stuck with me. After that, I resolved never again to use leverage if I could avoid it, even on sure things. Peace of mind was worth more than the extra return. These stories aren't cherry-picked anomalies. I've watched dozens play out over 90-plus years. The pattern is remarkably consistent. Those who treat debt as a tool to be used sparingly, if at all, end up with options, serenity, and real wealth. Those who treat it as fuel for a richer lifestyle today almost always pay a heavy price tomorrow. Sometimes financial ruin, always lost compounding and lost freedom. The difference isn't intelligence, education, or even starting income. It's temperament, the ability to delay gratification, to ignore social pressure, to value future freedom over present appearance. Debt destroys options. Its absence creates them. If you take nothing else from my ramblings, take this. Choose your stories wisely. Decide which character you want to be in the drama of your own life. The one who borrowed the future and lost it, or the one who patiently built something enduring. All right, we've covered the why and the why not, the traps, the stories, the principles that sound simple until you try to live them. Now let's get down to brass tacks. You're listening because you want to do something about it, not just nod along. So here are the concrete, actionable steps I'd give to any young person starting out today who wants to build real wealth without the chains of debt. I followed most of these myself, and I've seen them work for others time and again. Step 1. Face the music. Calculate your true net worth right now, today. Assets minus liabilities. Cash, investments, retirement accounts, home equity if any. Subtract every dollar of student loans, credit cards, car notes, personal loans, everything. Be brutally honest. Most people have never done this and live in denial. Write it down. If it's negative or close to zero, that's fine. That's your starting line. Knowing the number is the first step to changing it. Step 2, build a written budget and track every single expense. Not in your head, on paper, or in an app. I like simple. 50% of take-home pay to needs, rent, food, utilities, transportation, 30% to wants, entertainment, dining out, hobbies, and at least 20% to savings and debt payoff. If you have high interest debt, make that savings rate 30% or more until it's gone. Track religiously for 3 months. You'll discover leaks you never imagined. $50 here, $8 there on coffee, or subscriptions that add up to thousands a year. Step 3. Attack existing debt with everything you've got. Prioritize by interest rate. Highest first, avalanche method, for pure math efficiency, or smallest balance first, snowball method, if you need quick psychological wins. Whatever keeps the fire lit. Pay minimums on everything else. Throw every extra dollar at the target. No new debt, period. Freeze your credit cards in a block of ice if that's what it takes. Live on cash or debit only. Step 4. Build an emergency fund before you do anything else fun. Aim for 3 to 6 months of essential living expenses in a plain savings account. This is your buffer against life's surprises. Car repair, medical bill, job loss. Without it, one emergency sends you right back to the credit cards. I kept a cash cushion even in my leanest years. It let me sleep at night. Step 5. Once high-interest debt is gone and the emergency fund is solid, start investing the surplus. Keep it simple. Broad stock index funds. Maybe a bond allocation if you're conservative. No day trading, no hot tips, no crypto gambles. Just steady, low-cost, diversified exposure to great businesses. Warren and I built fortunes on this approach. You don't need to be fancy. You need to be consistent. Step 6. Increase your earning power aggressively. Side hustles, skill building, negotiating raises, job hopping for better pay when it makes sense. Early in my career, I took on extra legal work, invested in learning about businesses, started small investment partnerships. Every extra dollar earned went to savings, not lifestyle. Live on last year's income while this year's grows. Step 7. Institute buying delays and quality rules. For any non-essential purchase over, say, $100, wait 30 days. Write it down and revisit. Half the time you'll realize you don't need it. For things you do buy, clothes, furniture, appliances, buy the best quality you can afford with cash. It lasts longer and costs less over time. I've worn the same style of suits for decades, driven reliable used cars, lived in homes I could truly own. No flash, but no payments either. Step 8. Automate everything. Set up automatic transfers the day you get paid. Emergency fund, investments, extra debt payments. What you don't see in your checking account you won't miss or spend. These aren't revolutionary. They're just disciplined. I did versions of all this when I was rebuilding after my divorce and early struggles. No big income at first, just steady law fees and relentless saving. By my late 30s, the habits had compounded into freedom. If you're deep in student loans or credit card debt, it might take 5 or 10 years of intense focus to get clear. That's okay. 10 disciplined years now buys you 40 or 50 free ones later. Most people do the reverse, 10 or 20 easy years early, then decades of grinding to catch up. You get to choose. Start small if you must. Cut one subscription, pack one lunch, sell something you don't need. Momentum builds. I've seen people pay off $50,000, $80,000, even $100,000 of debt in a handful of years by living like this. One couple I read about recently, both teachers, cleared $120,000 in student loans in 7 years by renting a small apartment, driving old cars, and side hustling tutoring. Now in their mid-30s, they're investing heavily and on track for financial independence before 50. You can do it too. It's not about deprivation forever. It's about front-loading the discipline so the back half of life is easy. Get these habits in place while you're young, and compounding will carry you the rest of the way. Well, young friends, we've covered a lot of ground together. I've told you about the dumb mistakes I narrowly avoided, the traps that have sunk so many otherwise clever people, the simple principles that actually work, the stories of those who won and those who lost, and the practical steps you can start taking today. If you've stuck with me this far, you're already ahead of most, because most folks would rather chase the next shiny promise than sit still for some straightforward truth. Here's the heart of it. I could have retired comfortably at 35, maybe even a little earlier, if I'd been utterly ruthless about living below my means and staying completely clear of consumer debt from the very beginning. I wasn't perfect. I had a modest mortgage for a time, and life threw its share of curveballs, but I never let borrowing become a habit. By my late 30s, the combination of steady saving and prudent investing had already built a base that compounding could carry the rest of the way. I kept working because I loved it, not because I had to. That's the freedom I want for you. You millennials have advantages I never dreamed of. Information at your fingertips, low-cost index funds, side hustle opportunities everywhere. But you also face headwinds, higher education costs, stagnant entry-level wages in many fields, social pressure amplified by endless feeds of curated lifestyles. Debt is pushed on you harder than it ever was. On my generation, the system wants you indebted. It's profitable for someone else. Don't let it win. Avoid debt like you would avoid a deadly disease. Treat every loan offer, every credit card solicitation, every buy now, pay later temptation as the poison it truly is. Live modestly for a while, maybe longer than feels comfortable, and watch what happens when your money works for you instead of against you. A decade or two of discipline now buys you a lifetime of options later. The option to change careers, to start a family without financial terror, to give generously, to retire while you're still young enough to enjoy it. I'm not promising it will be easy. There will be evenings when friends are out spending money you've chosen to save, vacations you'll skip, purchases you'll delay. You'll feel behind at times, but that feeling is an illusion. You're actually pulling far ahead, because every dollar not paid in interest is a dollar compounding into future freedom. Think back to those stories. The tech worker who leveraged everything and lost it all in the crash. The teacher couple who lived simply and retired with millions. The surgeon crushed by lifestyle debt versus the frugal colleague who sailed into retirement healthy and happy. Which life do you want? The choice is yours, and it's made in 1,000 small decisions day after day. You're smarter than I was at your age in many ways. Better educated, more worldly, quicker with technology. Use that intelligence. Cultivate the discipline to delay gratification, the skepticism to question what everyone is doing, and the patience to let compounding do its quiet miracle. I've lived long enough to see how most financial stories end. The ones who stay out of debt, save diligently, and invest simply almost always end up with more than enough, and more importantly, with peace of mind. The ones who borrow to live beyond their means almost always end up working longer, worrying more, and regretting the chances they missed. Your best life is waiting on the other side of these choices, not a life of private jets and mansions. Warren and I never chased that, and we did all right, but a life where money serves you instead of the other way around. A life where you wake up knowing you're free. Start today. One small cut, one extra dollar saved, one debt payment accelerated. Build the habits now while time is on your side, and thank yourself richly later. And if you found this talk helpful, look into some of my other ideas on mental models, or read Warren's shareholder letters. They're full of the same kind of no-nonsense wisdom. There's plenty more straightforward thinking out there if you're willing to seek it. Go make it happen. You've got everything you need.